A widow, sold because she couldn't conceive. But the rancher with a baby girl asked her to stay. The morning sun hung low over the parched earth, painting the town square in harsh amber and shadow. Dust rose in lazy spirals from the dry dirt streets, sticking to clothes, hair, and skin like a shroud. Eliza's bare feet pressed into the coarse wooden platform, each splinter biting lightly at her soles. Her hands were bound loosely with coarse rope, and the fabric of her dress, once bright with promise, now sagged like ash draped across her frame. She swayed slightly, the wind tugging at the hem, carrying the acrid smell of sweat, horse, and hay. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, a low, persistent hum of judgment. Useless. Worthless. The words slipped through the heat-hazed air like dry leaves skittering across the dirt. Her eyes, wide and haunted, scanned the faces around her. Men leaned on wooden posts, eyes calculating, hands twitching as if she were a prize steer to be appraised. The auctioneer's hammer gleamed in the sunlight, worn wood polished by years of cruelty. Each tap of the gavel was a drumbeat in her chest, every glance from the crowd a reminder of what they thought of her. A widow with no children, a body judged, a heart discarded. A single hawk traced lazy circles overhead, its shadow slicing across the ground, indifferent to human suffering. Yet somehow a silent witness to her shame, the town patriarch. A man with a face carved of stone and a heart hardened by debts and greed watched from the side, nodding to the auctioneer as though she were cattle, not a woman. Her late husband's death had left her vulnerable, exposed, and the world was cruel in its hunger for someone to blame, or someone to own. Then, movement cut across the dust. Beau Marston, tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette etched by the sun, appeared at the edge of the square. A man carved from wind and hardship, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a battered hat, a crying infant cradled in one arm. The baby's cheeks were streaked with tears, tiny fists clenching at the thin blanket wrapped around her. Beau's boots struck the wooden planks with a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs for a heartbeat. Their eyes met. The world fell away. For a moment, the auctioneer, the patriarch, the whispering crowd, all vanished beneath the weight of that gaze. Eliza saw in him not just a stranger, but a man who understood suffering. He did not see her as property. He saw the pulse beneath the rope, the life beneath the ash-colored dress. The town gasped. No man of Beau's standing intervened for a widow, yet here he stood, voice low but carrying through the still air. She stays. The auctioneer's gavel trembled in his hand. "You claim her?" A town elder sputtered, disbelief twisting his face. "She's not for sale," Beau said, each word deliberate, like a bullet cutting the space between them. "Not to you. Not to anyone." A ripple ran through the crowd. Some cursed under their breath. Others stared with wide, shocked eyes. Eliza felt her knees weaken. Free? After the fear, the judgment, the chains? Yet the weight of the town's eyes remained, heavy and relentless. Beau stepped closer, holding the baby higher, so that the child's soft cries intertwined with the wind and the dry hiss of dust. "Take her with me," he said, voice a quiet anchor. "I see what you've endured, I see. What's in you?" She wanted to speak, to plead, to ask why, but her throat was raw, her lips trembling. The words fell short, swallowed by the sun, the heat, the dust. Instead she nodded, feeling the first flicker of trust, the first stirrings of hope. The auctioneer's gavel slammed down. The sound reverberated through the wooden beams, through the dirt, through her chest. The crowd remained, frozen, murmuring, some in relief, some in outrage. Eliza's future, uncertain and raw, began to twist toward an unexpected path. Beau handed her the infant. The baby's tiny fingers curled around Eliza's rough palm, warm and insistent, demanding care. The weight of the child, small but undeniable, pressed against her chest, grounding her, pulling her toward a destiny she never dared imagine. In that moment, beneath the sweltering sun and the circling hawk, she understood that survival was no longer merely an act. It was a choice, and the path ahead, though uncertain, might finally hold a spark of life, of meaning, of belonging. The wind rattled the planks of the platform one last time as Eliza stepped down, leaving the auction behind, leaving judgment behind. Every whispered accusation, every cold glance fell away like dust on the wind. She breathed it in. Freedom, raw and blinding, and felt the first pulse of possibility in her chest. Eliza followed Bo across the plains, each step sinking into the sun-baked dirt, the heat rising in waves from the cracked earth. Dust clung to her ankles, streaked her dress, mingled with the sweat that coated her temples. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush, dry grass and distant cedar, curling around her like a cloak of memory and fear. In her arms the infant stirred, tiny fists pressing against her chest, nails soft but insistent. The warmth of the child, so small and fragile, pressed purpose into her chest where emptiness had once lived. The Marston Ranch sprawled beneath the horizon like a monument to perseverance and solitude. Long, weather-beaten barns sagged slightly beneath storms past. Fences bowed and patched in uneven planks, and the earth around it bore the tracks of years. Horses' hooves, wagon wheels, and the bare impressions of boots worn thin. Smoke spiraled from the chimney in lazy curls, sharp against the smell of hay and livestock, promising the rare comfort of home in a world that had offered her little. Bo's shadow fell over her as he walked beside her. Tall and silent, the infant cradled securely in his strong arms. His eyes, dark and unreadable beneath the brim of his hat, flicked toward her now and then, gauging, measuring, weighing her like the wind itself might weigh the sails of a boat. He said nothing, but the silence was not empty. It was charged, heavy with unspoken understanding. Inside the farmhouse, silence pressed against her like a living thing. The floorboards creaked beneath her tentative steps, each groan echoing through the narrow hallways, each shadow thrown by the hearth a living specter on the walls. Bo's gaze lingered on her as she unpacked the meager belongings she had brought, eyes sharp but unreadable, holding the tension of the plains and the caution of a man who had seen too much. Eliza worked with quiet determination. She swept the dust from the worn wood, stoked the fire until sparks danced like fireflies, and hummed a half-forgotten lullaby to the baby, whose eyes closed and opened with the rhythm of her voice. Cooking, tending the small garden, learning the routines of the ranch. Each day she measured herself against the pace of the land, the rhythm of Bo's movements, the patience demanded by both. In the evenings she would watch him from across the room, adjusting saddle straps or checking fences, a man in harmony with a place carved by storms and labor. The nights were the hardest. Wind rattled windows and tugged at shutters, carrying whispers she could not fully discern, the echo of her late husband's laugh, the cry of the child she had never born. The shadows of the room lengthened and twisted as firelight flickered, and Eliza felt herself shrinking, pressing her back to the wall as memories rose like smoke. Bo's eyes would find her in these moments, quiet, observant, never intrusive, but heavy with understanding. She sensed him measuring the fractures in her soul, each glance stitching invisible threads between them. Their conversation was sparse. A grunt, a nod, a single sentence piercing through the hush like a sharpened knife. "She's safe," Bo would say, voice low, the words hanging longer than any speech could. "You'll do fine." That was enough. More words were unnecessary. The air between them was thick with meaning, trust, and the subtle pulse of something more fragile, more dangerous, something that might grow if tended carefully. At dusk, the world outside bled red as the sun sank behind distant mesas, setting the horizon aflame. Eliza sat on the steps outside the cabin, the baby asleep against her shoulder, the warmth of the child a tether to life she had thought lost. The wind stirred the dust at her feet, carried the scent of hay, and whispered through the long grass like secrets from a world that had nearly abandoned her. In that quiet moment she allowed herself a fragile thought. She was no longer alone. Yet the shadows lingered. Judgment from the town still perched in the corners of her mind, the weight of her past pressing lightly but persistently on her shoulders. Bo's silhouette moved inside the cabin, tall and steadfast, and she imagined the ghost of loneliness retreating just a fraction. At the promise of partnership, protection, and the possibility of love born not from necessity but choice. As the sky darkened to purple, she rocked the baby gently, listening to the soft creak of the cabin, the sigh of the wind through the eaves, the low hum of a horse settling in the stable. The ranch breathed with life, both old and new, and for the first time since the auction, she felt the faint stirrings of hope. Each heartbeat of the child against her chest was a drumbeat of purpose, a reminder that even in a world carved of dust, wind, and silence, life, and perhaps even love, could take root. The sky tore itself apart in sudden fury. Thunder rolled across the distant ridges, a deep drum that shook the bones of the earth and rattled the loose boards of the barn. Wind whipped through the open fields, tearing at fences, flinging dust and dry grass into the air like sparks from a fire. Rain lashed against the windows in jagged sheets, spattering across the cabin roof with a sharp, staccato rhythm. Inside, the fire flickered wildly, throwing the room into shifting shadows that danced and recoiled against the walls. Bo had saddled his horse and ridden out to secure the cattle before the storm truly broke. The rumble of hooves faded into the distance, leaving Eliza alone with the infant in her arms. The baby's soft whimpers were swallowed by the roar of the wind, yet their fragile rhythm tethered her to the present. She brushed damp hair from her forehead and caught her reflection in the darkened window pane, a ghostly image of pale skin, haunted eyes, yet a jaw set with quiet determination. The auction, the cold eyes of men who sold her, the judgment, the whispers, all rose unbidden, a relentless ghost pressing her back against memory and shame. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the cabin in a brilliant, brief white. Eliza flinched, clutching the baby tighter, feeling the warmth of life against her chest and the chill of fear in her spine. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside her, each flash revealing not only the room, but the steel of her resolve. Then came the shouting. Voices, rough and emboldened by rumor, pierced the wind. Townsfolk had arrived, emboldened by whispers of defiance and fortune. Their boots thudded across the porch, sticks and fists raised, sneering as they demanded the return of their property. Their eyes, sharp with greed and contempt, sought to unmoor her from the fragile safety she had begun to claim. Eliza's body tensed, every muscle taut, her breath shallow. She rocked the baby with one arm, the child's warmth grounding her against the rising panic. She would not step aside. She would not be sold again, not to greed, not to fear, not to judgment. Her voice, soft but unwavering, carried over the wind. "She's mine. We're staying." A collective sneer rose, but the storm drowned most of it. The first blow came suddenly. A man lunged toward the door, forcing her back. The fire spat sparks into the air as wood groaned under his weight, and the room seemed to shrink around her. Eliza stepped back instinctively, raising her hand as though she could ward off the fury. The baby whimpered, tiny fists clutching at her dress, and then Bo returned. He rode into the storm, mud and rain coating his boots, eyes blazing with a fury that matched the sky. Words were few, a curt command, a warning shouted above the wind. Guns were drawn, fists collided with boards. Dust rose in clouds, and sparks flew from the hearth as the battle spilled into the small kitchen and the barn beyond. Outside, the wind howled like a chorus of coyote cries, and the rain stung sharp against exposed skin. Amid the chaos, Eliza discovered something she had forgotten, or never known. Courage. Survival was no longer passive. She moved with the storm, her instincts honed by years of judgment and suffering. She blocked, ducked, and dodged, using her body to shield the baby, using her voice to deflect and command. She grasped for tools, for anything to protect what mattered most. And with each moment, each small victory, she felt herself grow, not fragile, not powerless, but formidable in ways she had only imagined. Bo fought with silent authority, a whirlwind of precision and force. His eyes flicking to Eliza with admiration and something more. A spark, fragile but undeniable. Desire and respect shimmered between them, unspoken yet electric, a current that mirrored the storm outside. Each blow, each discharge of gunfire, seemed to tighten the bond, weaving them together in shared survival. Finally, the assailants broke. Mud-slick boots retreated, their shouts swallowed by the relentless rain and the distant rumble of thunder. The cabin, battered but standing, smelled of wet wood, fire, and dust. Eliza sank to her knees, the baby nestled safely against her chest, tiny fingers curling in trust. Bo stood nearby, chest heaving, eyes scanning her face for injury, for weakness, finding only resolve and a strength that took his breath. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the ranch in stark white, casting every ridge and shadow into sharp relief. Outside, the wind tore at the horizon, flinging rain in silver sheets. Yet inside, warmth lingered. The fire still burned. The baby's soft whimpers punctuated the silence, a fragile heartbeat amidst chaos. Eliza lifted her gaze to Bo. No words were needed. The storm had spoken for them. Courage, loyalty, protection, and the tentative beginnings of love. Outside, the world raged. Inside, life endured. And as the storm slowly moved beyond the ridges, leaving the ranch slick with rain and scent of earth, Eliza understood that her past could not chain her any longer. The fires of memory had shaped her, but they would no longer define her. She would fight, she would protect, she would live. Days passed across the Marston Ranch with a rhythm slow and deliberate. The plains stretching endlessly under the pale blue sky, wind stirring the dry grass like whispered secrets. Eliza moved among the barns and fences, her hands learning the weight of buckets and the scent of hay, the baby nestled against her shoulder or cradled in her arms. Bo rode alongside her at times, their shadows merging on the dusty earth, their proximity a tension neither dared name aloud. In the quiet moments, silence spoke louder than any words. They watched horses graze in the corral, tails flicking at flies, muscles rolling under sun-scorched hides, and their hands brushed occasionally over the rough hay bales, sparks of electricity passing through fingertips like the first fire of spring. The baby's laughter, small and pure, broke through their guarded walls, a reminder of life's fragile beauty and the possibility of joy in a world that had often offered only grief. Each glance, each fleeting touch, carried weight heavier than any conversation could hold. Bo's past hung between them like a shadow cast by the setting sun. Whispers of a family feud with neighboring ranchers traveled with the wind, tales of a wife long gone, of choices that had left him hardened, a man whose reputation forbade softness. Eliza's own scars were invisible, yet indelible. The shame of the auction, the grief of a life that had been stolen, the memory of judgment that clung like dust to her skin. Together, they were two wounded souls orbiting in the same fragile light, drawn by something that neither society nor circumstance allowed. Their interactions were careful, deliberate. Eliza's hand lingered a moment too long on his shoulder as she passed him a bale of hay. Bo's eyes softened when she tended the baby, brushing hair from the child's face with gentleness he rarely displayed. A simple nod, a half smile, a breath held too long, all became charged with meaning. It was a slow burn, the fire of attraction restrained by caution. Attention threaded through every routine, repairing fences, fetching water, watching storms roll across the horizon. One evening, the sky turned a bruised purple, streaked with the last light of day. Inside the cabin, firelight flickered across walls, throwing shadows that danced like ghosts. Rain tapped softly against the windows, a lullaby of tension and anticipation. Eliza sat close to the hearth, the baby asleep against her chest. Bo moved near, crouching to stoke the fire, and for a long moment neither spoke. Their shared silence was intimate, a language beyond words, filled with longing and fear. Finally, the quiet cracked. Bo's voice, low and unpolished, carried across the warm air. "I never wanted to need someone. Until now." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading through the room, touching every hidden thought, every unspoken hope. Eliza's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the baby, her eyes glistening in the firelight. She swallowed hard, the weight of past shame pressing against the fragile spark of trust and affection growing between them. The wind whispered through the open window, stirring curtains and hair alike, as if the plains themselves were urging confession, urging them to step across the invisible line drawn by circumstance and fear. Eliza's lips parted, a sound caught somewhere between a sigh and a laugh, fragile and tremulous. She reached toward him, hand hovering over his as though testing whether the world would allow such audacity. He did not withdraw, did not flinch. Their hands brushed, lingering, a tether that neither dared sever. Outside, the world waited, indifferent and judgmental. Neighbors whispered in the distance, the legacy of rumors and feuds pressing in, threatening to tear their fragile bond apart. Yet inside, the fire crackled and danced, warming the room and the hearts within it. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling against Eliza's chest, a heartbeat anchoring them to the present, to possibility, to life, reclaimed from loss. Every glance between them now carried a new weight, an understanding that each moment could be the first step into danger, or the first step into love. Bo's eyes, dark and intense, met hers with a vulnerability he rarely allowed, while she responded with a courage that belied her past trauma. They existed together in the hush of the cabin, the storm outside fading into distant thunder, the plains stretching wide, silent witnesses to the unspoken confession blooming between them. The chapter closed with them sitting close by the fire, the baby nestled safely between them, and the air thick with unuttered truths. Their hands hovered near, a magnetic force neither could resist, a promise suspended in flamelight and shadow. Beyond the walls, judgment lingered. Within, desire, trust, and the first fragile threads of forbidden affection wound tightly around their hearts, delicate yet unbreakable, hinting at the story still to come. Night fell over the Marston Ranch, with a silence that felt brittle, stretched thin across the ridges like tattered cloth. Shadows lengthened, crawling over barns and fences, bending the world into a palette of dark blue and black. The wind carried the acrid stench of smoke and fear, teasing at the edges of every thought, rattling shutters and tugging at Eliza's hair. The baby slept in the corner of the cabin, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of hay and warmth, unaware of the storm gathering beyond the threshold. The tranquility they had carved with so much effort shattered with the first distant hoofbeats. A rival rancher, enraged by Beau's defiance and the whispers of conquest, rode onto the property with his men in tow. The silhouettes of their horses cut jagged shapes against the dim horizon, eyes glinting like steel under the moonlight. Dust rose in eddies around their boots as they advanced, a warning carried on the wind. Eliza's heart tightened. She moved instinctively, grabbing what she could, tools, lanterns, anything to defend the home that had become her sanctuary. Beau's calm authority steadied her, a quiet force in the eye of a gathering tempest. They readied themselves, pistols loaded, doors barricaded, every movement precise, rehearsed under months of shared vigilance. The tension hung thick, a taut line stretched between courage and fear, as shadows merged and twisted across the ridge. The first shots rang out like distant thunder, echoing across the plain and into the cabin. Horses reared, hooves thrashing, hoarse whinnies punctuating the night. Dust rose in choking clouds as men clashed in a slow-motion frenzy, the clash of fists and gunfire painting the night with sparks and fury. Eliza's heart hammered, but the lessons Beau had taught her, the quick thinking, the small tactical maneuvers, guided her hands and feet. She ducked, blocked, moved with precision, her body a shield around the sleeping child. Each decision, each action was a heartbeat of survival. Beau's presence was a storm unto itself. He moved with lethal grace, fists striking, pistols discharging in bursts that shook the night. His eyes, dark and burning, caught Eliza's in fleeting, desperate glances, a silent acknowledgement of the thin line between life and death. Every shot, every blow, spoke of loyalty, of pain endured, of justice claimed in the fury of a moment. He became both protector and avenger, his movements a choreography of trust and experience honed by years on the plains. Amidst the chaos, Eliza discovered her own courage fully ignited. She moved through smoke and dust, every instinct alive, protecting the baby and herself. A thrown chair, a swinging lantern, a cleverly aimed kick, it all became part of the symphony of defense. The wind howled, carrying the cries of men and the pounding of hooves, the baby's whimpers mingling faintly with the storm of sound. And yet, beneath the terror and adrenaline, a new truth emerged. Her survival was no longer passive. She was active, formidable, unbroken. The conflict reached its peak on the ridge above the barn. Beau faced the rival man alone, fists and pistols telling a story beyond words, a story of loyalty, of honor, of revenge earned and justice demanded. Dust spiraled around them, lightning briefly illuminating clenched jaws and the fierce glint of determination. The rivals' threats dissolved into the night as Beau's precision and resolve overcame brute aggression. Every shot fired, every punch thrown, was a testament to what they were defending: home, family, and the fragile love that had begun to take root between them. By dawn, the storm of human fury had passed. The rival and his men retreated, mud-slicked and defeated, their shouts swallowed by the quiet plains. The ranch bore the marks of battle: splintered fences, churned dirt, a barn door hanging crooked, but it stood. Eliza and Beau, mud-streaked and exhausted, leaned against one another, the baby secure between them. Their hands met in a desperate, trembling grasp, eyes locking in a silent acknowledgement. They had endured. Together. The first light of morning stretched across the scorched earth, painting the ranch in gold and crimson. Shadows receded, replaced by the quiet hum of life returning. Horses nickered softly in the paddocks. The wind sighed through the grasses, and the scent of rain-soaked earth mingled with the smoke and sweat of the night before. Eliza rested her head against Beau's chest, the warmth and strength beneath her hands, a grounding force. Love born in fire, she realized, could endure. Love born in chaos, forged under threat and fear, could survive even the harshest ridges of life. The chapter closed with the ranch silhouetted against the rising sun, battered but resilient, a symbol of rebirth and the fragile hope of lasting peace. Eliza held the baby close, Beau's arm around her, and in that quiet moment, the world outside, the judgments, the feuds, the shadows of the past, felt distant, almost irrelevant. They had weathered the storm. They had survived. And for the first time in a long time, possibility stretched wide, like the horizon beyond the ridge. Golden and infinite. The plains stretched golden under a high sun, the Marston Ranch alive with movement and quiet purpose. Horses grazed in orderly patterns, tails flicking lazily at the flies, while cattle lowed across the fields, their rhythm a heartbeat beneath the vast sky. Dust rose from worn paths, carried in lazy eddies by a gentle wind that smelled of hay, sun-warmed earth, and the faint tang of smoke from the cabin hearth. Eliza moved among it all, cradling Beau's daughter, whose tiny hands curled around her finger with instinctive trust. Each soft coo and gurgle was a reminder of the life she had once feared she would never know, the life she had been given to protect and nurture. Beau worked nearby, sweat glistening on his brow, arms strong and practiced as he repaired fences and tended the fields. Their hands brushed occasionally over sun-warmed wood, a spark of connection passing silently between them. Words were unnecessary. The rhythm of shared labor and quiet glances spoke volumes. Months of hardship, storms, and shared survival had drawn a thread between them, one woven of trust, resilience, and the unspoken poetry of lives slowly mending. The town's whispers, once cruel and relentless, had faded into cautious admiration. Men tipped their hats as they rode past, women nodded with quiet respect, and even the children looked on with curiosity rather than scorn. Judgment no longer hung over Eliza like a shadow. It had been replaced by recognition of her courage and her place within the fabric of the plains. Yet the world beyond the ranch remained unpredictable, a reminder that peace was never absolute, only earned and defended. And then, on a day when clouds darkened the horizon with a sense of quiet warning, a new test arrived. A wandering bounty hunter, eyes sharp and cruel, appeared along the ridge, riding with the arrogance of vengeance and a score long held against Beau's family. His presence was a shadow, a ripple in the calm, and the wind carried the faint scent of smoke, metal, and the promise of danger. Eliza's body tensed as she instinctively shifted the baby closer, instincts honed through months of survival tightening around her like a second skin. The confrontation was inevitable, yet brief. The bounty hunter's demands were cold, his voice slicing through the air with practiced menace. But Beau and Eliza, a team forged in fire and storm, responded with the precision of trust and courage earned together. Dust swirled around the barnyard as pistols flashed and fists struck, the fight a physical language that spoke more than words ever could. Every dodge, every counter, every move was informed by months of shared knowledge. The baby safe in the cabin, cries muffled by blankets, as the pair defended not just property, but the life they had built. No grand speeches were exchanged. There was no flourish of rhetoric or declaration, only action, only survival. And in that action, the bounty hunter's threat dissolved, defeated not by luck or chance, but by the unwavering bond between Beau and Eliza. The plains seemed to exhale, the wind shifting gentle and approving, as if acknowledging the triumph of courage, cunning, and unity over fear and malice. When the dust settled, the sun broke through the clouds, streaking the ranch with gold. Eliza emerged from the cabin, the baby tucked against her chest, eyes bright and filled with quiet awe at the world still spinning. Beau joined her, mud-streaked, hands rough from labor, yet his gaze softened as it met hers. No words were necessary. The battlefield had spoken their truth. The day settled into a gentle hum. Horses nickered in the pastures, cattle grazed lazily, and the wind carried scents of hay, wildflowers, and the promise of continuation. Eliza laughed softly as the baby reached out, tiny fingers brushing Beau's cheek. He responded with a rare, unguarded smile, his hand finding hers. Their fingers intertwined, a perfect fit honed by months of shared trials, moments of vulnerability, and the slow bloom of forbidden affection made safe by survival. Beau began, then paused, searching her eyes. She understood him without needing the rest. Finally, he said, low and sure, "We chose each other. And that is enough." Eliza's lips curved into a smile. Soft but radiant, and the baby cooed in response, a fragile heartbeat against the vastness of the plains. Together, the three of them, woman, man, child, stood in the golden light, the horizon stretching wide and infinite, a canvas of possibility painted with the scars and triumphs of the past. Their love, born from tragedy, taboo, and relentless judgment, now promised a legacy of strength, of family, of the quiet poetry of life rebuilt from dust and fire. The ranch itself seemed to lean into the light, weathered wood glowing, fences standing resilient against the breeze, barns solid against storms yet to come. Each plank, each stone, each living creature on the land bore witness to the endurance of hearts shaped by struggle and tempered in the heat of adversity. The wind carried the laughter of the child across fields once silent with fear, a song of hope threaded through every blade of grass, every cloud drifting across the infinite sky. Eliza pressed the baby closer, feeling warmth, life, and love radiating from her chest to Beau's hand resting on her shoulder. Their eyes met, and in that single glance passed a universe of understanding. They had survived storms, judgment, and loss. They had endured. They had chosen each other, and that choice was stronger than any past cruelty, any future threat. Together they had carved a legacy from hardship, a family bound not by circumstance but by courage, devotion, and the indomitable fire of the human heart. As the sun climbed higher, gilding the plains in gold and shadow, Eliza felt for the first time the fullness of belonging. The Marston Ranch was more than land. It was home, sanctuary, and testament. Beau's daughter stirred, gurgled, and laughed, and the sound carried across the fields like a hymn of life reclaimed. The horizon stretched endless, promising more days of love, labor, and laughter. They had survived. They had loved. And the story of hearts forged in fire and storm would endure, as infinite and unbroken as the golden plains themselves.